Welcome back, everybody, to part 2 of the murder of Linda Stein, the celebrity realtor.
Yes.
Here we are. Amy, we've had a long week, both of us.
We've had a way long week.
But a fantastic one, right?
Yeah.
All right. Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, what did you do in real estate today? Well, actually, let me back that up because it's 10 a.m., everybody. So what did you do this week?
This week, I talked to a few clients, showed a couple houses. So it's been kind of a slower week, I guess, for real estate for me. But you're super busy.
Yeah, I have been busy getting things prepped and ready for clients for the summer because we're headed into, late spring, summer in Utah is one of the busiest seasons for real estate.
Yeah.
So there's just been a lot of good stuff going on, like new things, new goals, right? It's exciting.
I love it. It is exciting.
But I'm super excited to be back in our studio. We had to take a little bit of a break, but here we are.
Yeah.
Doing what we love the most, which is talking about murder
Yeah.
and real estate.
What we do to relax, which is kind of weird.
It's a little bit strange, but I'm fine with it.
Okay.
If you haven't heard part 1 of this case, the murder of Linda Stein, go ahead and go back and listen because we give all of Linda's background. And she was a fascinating human being, very dynamic, right? She lived a very bold life and did a lot of different things. So she is fascinating. Amy, let's jump right back in. It's October 30th, 2007, right?
Yeah.
We are in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, which is where Linda Stein's apartment was.
Yes.
And Amy, you did the deep dive research like you always do, and you found a floor plan of her apartment, right?
I did find a floor plan of her apartment.
Which, just glancing at it, would have been an incredible apartment, especially for Manhattan, right? Where they tend to be a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
I mean, based on what I know about Manhattan real estate, which is TV, but it's a beautiful apartment.
Yeah.
Huge. Anyway, that's the real estate part of what I have to say right now is that her apartment was incredible. And it was on the Upper East Side.
Yeah, it was a multi-million-dollar apartment in
Absolutely.
2007.
Yeah, and the Upper East Side of Manhattan is known for being an upper scale neighborhood. It's known for being very quiet and has a lot of connected people. We'll say it like that.
Yeah.
Like the neighborhood is very interconnected. So,
well, and crimes like this don't happen.
yeah, but okay, I have something to say about that.
Okay, great.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
I was watching a different documentary last night, just relaxing. And they said the same thing. We're in a small town in the Midwest somewhere. Someone gets murdered, right?
Yeah.
In every single documentary, I swear, or podcast, they say 2 things. 1, she lit up a room. And 2, things like this don't just happen in this kind of town. At this point, I'm yelling at my TV like, yes, they do. They happen in every small town. Like, what is wrong with you people?
I
Just
guess
drives
there's
me
just
nuts.
not a lot of like documentaries or stories that highlight the individuals with like in places that are high crime, maybe.
Oh, that's true. I guess like
Detroit.
I was just thinking Detroit, like Detroit, Murders in Detroit, part 1.
Yeah.
80,000 episodes.
Yeah.
Detroit, we're not coming for you.
No.
You're just an
But
example.
I'm just saying, like, I feel like what makes some of these stories unique is the area that just it doesn't see
Sure.
that kind of.
And probably the
intense.
brutality of the crime, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, either way, it doesn't happen in this part of town. So we left off part 1 with a phone call. So it was around 10:30 p.m. and the police get a phone call from Mandy, who is Linda Stein's daughter. And she says, I need help right away. I think my mom is dead.
Yeah.
Right? That's where we left. So detectives are at the scene. They find that Linda is laying on the ground, right?
Mhm.
Face down.
Face down.
And she has a hood covering her head.
Yeah. The back of her head.
Right. So they pull the hood back and they find that she's been beaten on the head. She has over 10 head wounds, lacerations to her cheek and face. The autopsy comes out the next day. Actually, they did it very quickly within 24 hours and she had a broken spine. So it was a pretty brutal crime, especially considering like how critical your spine and your skull are, right? That was where
Yeah. I
the
mean,
attack was.
the autopsy showed that she had been struck in the head over 20 times and that she had 5 lacerations on her head.
We
So,
always seem to
like,
come up with
yeah,
different math when
I
it comes to
know.
wounds,
Yeah,
which
I don't know.
is okay. Let's just, it was in the
Coroner's
It was
report.
in the range
Yeah.
of deadly to death.
It's definitely overkill.
Absolutely. Always seems to be. But it's a brutal death either way, right? And detectives are going to start working on this right away. And the first person they're going to talk to is the person that they know is in Linda's life every single day, in and out. Linda has a ton of friends. She has a ton of clientele. She has family. But there's one person that's in and out of her life constantly, which would be her assistant, right?
Yeah.
Her executive assistant. Her name is Natavia.
Yeah.
Natavia Lowry is her full name. She's in her early 20s, so she's young. She'd only been working for Linda for about 2 months, they said.
Yeah, not super long.
New to the scene. Yeah. Probably is just learning the ropes of being an executive assistant for one thing, but to a real estate agent as well, right? Which has some different specifications, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And we were talking about this earlier off set. I don't even know what to say.
We can call it a set, whatever. Yeah. Off mic.
Yeah. About how we've been in those kind of admin roles and how, what's the word I'm looking for? How intense and demanding they can be.
Right.
So especially to like higher profile agents like Linda was.
Yeah. Who are very busy. They have a lot of clientele. And I have found typically for agents who need full-time executive assistants, they're the type of agent that are really working the social and the networking aspect of their business, which is important. They're the face of the business is what I mean, right? And then they're the only ones, because they're the ones that are licensed, to do the actual negotiations. Yeah. So they're busy doing that. And then executive assistants help support everything that it takes to make that happen.
Well, and we both know, like, and maybe our audience doesn't know, there's a big difference between helping a regular client and luxury clients.
Oh, absolutely.
And the demand that comes into that.
So true.
So
I do have a little quote in here about that her friend gave. I'll tell you a little anecdote later on that just, supports exactly what you said, that it's a very different type of clientele that expects more face-to-face time and
one-on-one attention.
Yeah, absolutely, which, deserved. So they're speaking to Natavia, and they ask her about the timeline of the day, because the autopsy came back and they know that Linda died during the day of October 30th.
Yeah.
And so Natavia sits down. She's very cooperative. She's super helpful. She's a young, sweet girl, right? And I'm sure traumatized by this.
Yeah.
And so she starts telling the detectives kind of their day in, day out routine. And this was just another regular day. So Natavia states that she walks to and from the office. So I guess it's close enough that she can go from the apartment to the office back and forth several times a day on foot, which, to be fair, it's New York. And oftentimes you're on foot.
Well, and sometimes it is faster by the time you get through traffic to walk a bunch of blocks than it is.
So true. So she goes back and forth. She arrived in the morning at some point to give some help to Linda. Natavia says she's helping Linda do her hair and put her hair up, which Linda is in her 60s, right? And she is starting to have, or has had, as a result of some healthcare issues, it seems like arthritic issues probably, right?
I think
like
it was because of, she was recently diagnosed with like a brain tumor.
Right.
And so I think that where the tumor is located in her head has prevented her from doing fine motor skills and tasks like that, like buttoning, holding curling irons, like stuff like that. So she needs a little bit more assistance.
Yeah, which must be devastating for such a independent,
it totally
woman,
would
right?
be.
Yeah. So Natavia helps her do a lot of those types of tasks as well. So she states that at that point, Linda leaves the apartment to go for her daily walk in Central Park. So Natavia leaves also at that point and goes back to the office.
Yeah.
Natavia comes back. So she's walking back again. She comes back from the apartment, or to the apartment, to check on Linda, and Linda isn't there. So she leaves the comps so I don't know if we mentioned this in part 1, but just to recap, the source material that you and I both at the same time used for this was an episode of New York Homicide, which are cases told by the New York detectives that solve them, right? So just to tie that back in. So I'm being clear, the detectives are using this language. So they're saying Natavia goes back and forth, comes back with comps, and Linda's not there. So she leaves them with the doorman. Now, I wanted to ask you, Amy, if you would tell our audience a little bit about what comps are, because if you're watching a show like this and you have no idea what they're talking about,
and
maybe it sticks out and it's kind of weird, but this podcast is called Real Estate and Murder. So let's explain what comps are, because that's a term we use every day.
Yeah. So you may hear realtors either say comps or CMAs. Comparative market analysis is the full name of them, which is why you get the little abbreviations for them. But basically, it's tools that we use to estimate value of properties for our clients. And so I'm assuming Linda had several high-end apartment complexes that she was looking at to either have clients buy or sell. And we use comps for both. We want to make sure our client isn't paying too much. And then when we list, we want to make sure that we list at a high enough value that, they're getting adequate compensation for their property.
Yeah. Perfect.
And for real estate agents, it's an opinion that we give. For an appraiser, appraisers will also use comps, and they are the all in and
Final
all
say.
Of what they value the property.
Yeah, and a highly skilled agent really knows how to zone in on that kind of research and provide valid comps. And I know I consider us both, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but highly skilled agents. We focus on knowing that because we are helping our clients determine what fair market value is.
Yeah.
So those are comps, or comparables is the full word. But I remember being a brand new agent and learning these terms when I was taking classes and courses. And in real estate, we use a lot of abbreviations.
We do. We have a lot of acronyms too for stuff.
Yeah. But even worse are lenders, in the lending industry. They use so many acronyms that I would sit through a class and play it cool. I'd be like, oh my, writing down 1,000 initials, look up LBR, TED, FY. None of those are true. But I was so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But those are comps. Okay?
Yeah.
So Natavia drops those off. She states that she goes back to the office and then comes back to the apartment one more time. So she's been back and forth, 4 times now in this day, which she says is normal.
Yeah.
And she's there at 5 p.m. to check on Linda for one more round. But she finds that the door of the apartment is locked, which she thinks is odd, but she just goes ahead and leaves for the day and goes home.
Yeah.
Now, we do find out later, I don't know if Natavia volunteered this or we find out later, but Natavia did call Linda around 5:30, I believe it was, and leave a voicemail.
Yeah. So, the police have that recording.
Right.
And I think because she wasn't able to check in with Linda at the end of the day, she was probably paid hourly is my assumption. And she was just letting Linda know that she has dropped off everything, that she's headed home for the day, that her day is ended, and she's good to go.
So if we're at 5:30 p.m. and her executive assistant is going back and forth 4 times during the day, we have a pretty solid idea of when Linda was and wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So detectives they're now on the hunt. They've got to start this investigation. And so they start talking to friends and family, of course. One of the friends that we do see featured in this documentary several times is a beloved friend of Linda. His name is Mark. Beneke is how I believe it's pronounced. I saw, I wrote down the spelling. And so Mark, I apologize if that's not how it's spelled. I think you're adorable, but I'm going to call you Mark for the rest of the episode. So Mark says he tells police that it was his birthday that day, October 30th. And so he and Linda were supposed to go out and have drinks at night.
Yeah.
And he calls around 1 p.m. in the afternoon to confirm with Linda what time she wants to go out. And Natavia answers the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And she tells Mark that Linda's out taking her walk at the park. And then Mark says he never hears from Linda for the rest of the night. He kind of brushes it off like something must have happened. And then at 8 a.m. the next morning, he receives a phone call from Linda's daughters, Mandy and Samantha, informing him that she had passed away. So that gives us a little bit more of an added timeline, right? So now we're narrowing it down a little bit.
Linda did have a business meeting that night too, with a couple real estate. I don't know that they ever said what they were.
Sure.
And it was an important meeting. And Mark did know about that meeting because he had visited with Linda the day before. And she was kind of telling him about this important meeting that she had going on. So he may have just assumed that her meeting ran long.
Yeah, for sure. And now, again, we're filling in all the parts of her day. So we should be able to be narrowing down when it was that Linda all of a sudden didn't show up somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So detectives now, they're going to go to Linda's real estate office and start interviewing and talking with her coworkers and seeing what information they can provide. They don't get a whole lot out of it, except that they do get the name of a man named Raul Garcia, who used to work with Linda, and he also used to date Linda. And they had a conflict, right, where it sounds like Linda kind of pulled the trump card and was like, no, this is what we're doing, or this is what I want you to do. I mean, he didn't appreciate that, and so they ended their relationship.
Yeah.
And shortly thereafter, Raul is fired. And so for a second, that seems like it might be interesting. However, that incident was over 2 years ago. Raul had no anger or, simmering feelings from that incident.
Yeah.
He moved on. And he also had an alibi that the police were able to verify. So Raul's out. And the detectives at this point express that they're really kind of frustrated. They feel like they don't have anywhere to go. Really, who could have done this? Was it just a random murder for no reason? So right around then, one of the detectives who's interviewed on the show says he gets a phone call from the building manager of Linda's building. And the building manager's name is Ed. And he had actually been a friend of this detective for a long time.
Yeah.
So he was able to call him directly. And he informs the detectives that he had just recently installed surveillance cameras in the building.
I'm sure Ed was like, one, you hear that there's a murder in your building and you're like, oh gosh, this is not good, right? High-end clients, very expensive real estate in
Upper East Side.
Yeah, like this does not happen here. But then I'm sure he was like, wait a minute, we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because I can prove that we did everything safely. You know,
Sure.
they have a doorman and now they have security cameras.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Also, I wonder if a moment struck Ed where he was like, oh my gosh, the second I put in cameras, we catch a murderer. How many murders have I missed over the years?
Well,
it's 2007.
Yeah.
And we're just barely putting in cameras. But thank God that they did, because we now have an even better way to track the day.
Yeah.
The in and out of the building. So the detectives are really excited about this. They request the footage. They're getting it pulled. And in between this time, they know that the lobby of the building and then the roof, I believe, right?
It had construction workers
Yep.
that
so
were working.
They were remodeling or doing work on that. And so there was anywhere from 15 to 20 construction workers going in and out of the building a day.
Yeah.
The detectives are like, bingo, like this, we've got 20 people to go interview now. It has to be one of them, right?
Yeah. Detectives ended up interviewing upwards of 40 construction workers. They pulled background checks on these guys. Like they really dug deep because, you know, it's got to be someone outside the building.
Right. And a couple of the construction workers note that, you know, Linda was irritated,
with the work.
by the work and the noise. And so the building manager would cut off work for the construction workers around 4 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it gets to be close to 5, Linda's like not having it anymore.
Yeah, she's actually cursing out these men that are
right.
walking past, because she's on the 18th floor and they're working on the roof. So they're working like above her, but then they're walking past her hallway, yeah, on the way through the stairs carrying equipment and stuff. And she is fit to be tied.
So these detectives they're not getting anywhere still, right? And
yeah,
all of the construction workers check out. They can account for all of them on camera. The detectives do note, though, in the documentary that recently, like within the time frame of this murder, another murder had occurred in a similar part of town. So there's proof that, yeah, it does happen, the same, where a construction worker had murdered someone in their building. And so, you know, they're working these leads as if maybe this is going to become more of a common thing, or, you know, like this has already happened. And so let's look at this again.
I will say, for a disclaimer for our audience, there wasn't cameras on Linda's floor. So there was just the camera down in the lobby and not on her actual, like when the elevator opened up on her floor.
Right.
So.
And what we do know is this building has a doorman, which means that's your entry in and out. So any other entries or exits in the building are going to be locked down.
They should be.
Right. And so hopefully we're able to narrow down using the footage exactly who was in and out.
Mm-hmm.
So Amy, I just want to tell you a little bit about Linda's memorial and her friends and stuff, if that's okay.
Oh,
just
yeah.
want to note this. There was a huge memorial for Linda at Riverside, is what the detectives say. I'm going to assume that's a church or a building close by in the neighborhood. And it was said that they were shoulder to shoulder with lines out the door. Now, remember, Linda had a lot of...
This is the who's who are showing up to this funeral.
She had a lot of celebrity clients, but she also interacted in the world of musicians and in the music world way before her real estate career, right? And her husband...
Elton John is her girl's godfather.
Yeah, that's right. And she gave the Ramones their start.
Yeah.
She has a lot of... And Madonna, right?
Yeah.
So she's got a lot of like beloved family and friends that are there to support her. And her friend Mark tells a story, and he's talking about the memorial. He's the one sharing this story. So he says that he remembers one time Linda was in a hurry to get up to the Hamptons to show a high-end client a home that wanted to see it kind of last minute. So she calls Mark. She's like, I need a ride. We got to go. And Linda is dressing herself, changing her clothes and putting on her makeup and her hair as they're speeding to the Hamptons. And Mark goes, I was so sure we were going to get pulled over by the police because she's basically naked in the car. We're speeding to the Hamptons. And this is just what Linda did for her clients. Like, she stopped what she was doing and she made it happen. He specifically says that. He says that was what she did. She made it happen for her clients. And you and I could both relate to that in a sense that making your clients your absolute priority makes your client feel good. And she had a lot of return clientele. So she built her reputation on that hard work. And He does also note that at her memorial, there was laughter amongst the tears because it was a beautiful eulogy. He says the way that she was eulogized was beautiful. There is another friend that shows up on this documentary a lot, another sweet friend of Linda's. His name is Stephen Gaines. And these guys both must have had excellent friendships and relationships with her because they just adored her. You can tell in the way that they talk about her. And Stephen says about the memorial, it was just enormously sad. As she went by, I kissed her coffin. I wanted her to take my kiss to the other side.
Oh,
I know. She was loved. So back to the detectives. They're working all these leads. They're feeling frustrated, like they're running in the mud here. They can't really get anywhere. And there's one detective. There's like, 3 or 4 of them that are featured on this. 4, I believe, that are featured on this documentary. But this one cracks me up. He's your quintessential New York, like born and raised, because he's got that accent, right? So Amy, I try in every episode that we record to do a surprise Amy segment, right? And this is the part where I surprise Amy with something she either doesn't know or she doesn't know what I'm going to do. So here's what I'm going to do. This detective cracked me up so much when he was talking about the pressure that was put on this case, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, there's no way I can imitate his accent perfectly, but in a matter of 10 seconds, and I know because I had to rewind, I had to do that stupid 10-second back clicker over and over and over again, because this is what he says about the case, or about like where we're at in the case, right? And the community's frustrated. They're not making any progress.
Well, she's a high profile. They're getting a lot of pressure from the top.
That's exactly what he says. So he goes, again, in 10 seconds, I'm going to try. Okay, homicides happen. Like he's giving like the preface, or the other detective is giving the preface. Like homicides happen every day, but cases like this, they tend to become a vacuum and they suck up all of the air. So again, we're just talking about the amount of pressure. This detective flashes on screen and he goes, honestly, it started with the mayor. He gets the calls, and what's he going to do? He's going to call the commissioner. And what's the commissioner going to do? He's going to call the chief of detectives. And what's the chief of detectives going to do? He's going to call the Manhattan chief of detectives. And what's the Manhattan chief of detectives going to do? It's downhill around here, just like everywhere else. No lie, in 10 seconds, he just spits out. What's he going to do? He's going to call the commissioner. What's he going to do?
Tells you the chain of command right then and there.
Yeah, and then it just came in hot and fast, right?
Yeah.
What's he going to do? He's going to pick up the phone. He's going to call, and he's going to call, and here we are. The detectives are getting a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Well, it's high profile. The media is constantly calling.
Yeah, she was on the front page of like the Inquirer. She was in
page 6.
Yeah. So there is also, which I love, a female detective that is interviewed in this documentary, and she was very involved in the case. Now, as I was taking the notes, I was just listening, and as we're often like researching using these types of materials, we have to like stop, pause, take a note, and go back, right? So
yeah,
I caught that her name was Detective Alfredo. Swear that's what I heard. Turns out it's LaFredo.
Okay.
But I heard Alfredo.
Well, you did have
sounded delicious.
Alfredo the other day.
I did. I
dinner.
made some homemade Alfredo that was delicious. And by the time I got finished, I had mixed in like this fresh, beautiful pasta into it, and I was too tired to eat it, you guys. So maybe I was just like reminiscing, but it's Detective LaFredo. And she's actually critical in this case.
Yeah.
She's kind of the gangster of this case. So she's tasked with watching the surveillance footage now of the lobby. So the ins and outs of the entire day. And I can imagine how draining that is. And after a certain amount of time, I would assume like it starts to feel like it's just mundane and on repeat, right?
Yeah.
But she's not going to give up. And she says to the camera, I had a feeling that this video had a tell.
Oh, yeah.
And so she just keeps watching and watching. And she notices like the construction workers are coming in and out. The doorman's there. Natavia's coming in and out. What are we missing? And then the detectives realize not even Linda goes in and out.
Yeah. Linda,
Linda.
Linda is not seen on camera at all on the day of October 30th, 2007. Not one time.
Now we have to full stop.
Yeah.
Because something isn't right.
Yeah.
Which you said 18th floor, right?
Didn't go on her walk.
Yeah. She didn't scale the windows and like head down that way.
I mean, you never know. But
so the detectives slam on the brakes and go, okay, we have to stop. We have to go back. We've got to get Natavia back in here because Natavia gave us a pretty detailed in and out of her day. And when she saw Linda, we know the phone call happened at 1 p.m. from Mark. We're not seeing this. So they bring Natavia back in. And Amy, you're going to give us the timestamps of this camera footage, right?
Yeah, I
Give
do
us some
have
details.
I have the timestamps, and I guess most of my timestamps from the video are taken from like articles and not the show that we both watched.
It didn't give timestamps.
It didn't give timestamps. So Mine are taken from articles and stuff that were written about the timestamps of the videos.
Perfect.
So at 11:56 a.m., Natavia enters the building. She was carrying a single manila envelope. She is seen on surveillance walking past the renovation workers that were working on the lobby floor of the building, and she's waiting to gain access to the elevator. And there were no cameras on the 18th floor, which is where she gets off.
Okay, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So it's 11:56 a.m., so it's almost noon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is this the first time Natavia's seen on camera?
This is the first timestamp that I have.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And she says she's gone in the morning, but
Well, I mean, that's morning.
yeah.
I'm just curious, where the detectives are starting their timeline. And that makes sense because it would have been right around then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just so our audience kind of knows how the layout works, when you get off the elevator on the 18th floor, there's this little vestibule, which is just this little mini kind of hallway entryway. It's actually really small. There's enough room for like a desk in there. But then there's Linda's door
Front door.
right there.
Okay.
Yes, of her apartment building,
Okay.
just right off the elevator. And so
Just like an alcove?
yeah,
Okay.
basically. And so Linda's door is never locked because the people that are accessing the 18th floor are coming mainly to see her in that elevator.
Sure.
So at 1 p.m., Mark called and Natavia answered and said that Linda was out for a walk. At 1:19 p.m., Natavia is seen exiting Linda's area,
Okay.
carrying like down at the foyer. So she's got onto the elevator and come
She
down
went
to
straight from the vestibule, you mean, because that's the access?
Yeah. So
Okay.
she's exiting the elevator and she's seen carrying 2 large bags.
Okay,
a red.
and it's what time?
It's 1:19 p.m.
Sorry to interrupt.
And she's seen carrying 2 large bags, a red and a green, and the manila folder.
And she didn't enter with the bags, right? So she was
didn't enter. She
carrying
entered
something
with
down.
the manila folder, and she's seen exiting with the manila folder, but now she has 2 bags with her.
All right.
Samantha, who is Linda's oldest daughter, there's a report that says that she initially tells police that she called her mom at 2 p.m. and Linda answered the phone. And she ends up, we'll talk about that later, but that's what she initially tells police.
Well, and we do know that Mark made that phone call at approximately 1 p.m. he said. So,
but only talked to Natavia.
Right. Linda wasn't there at 1. And now Samantha is saying she had a phone call around 2 with Linda.
2,
So supposedly Linda would have come back in between that time.
Yeah.
So far what we know.
So far.
Gotcha.
At 5 p.m., Natavia is seen jumping off what Natavia describes as comps. They're just seen as papers on the security footage because the surveillance doesn't have sound. It's just cameras.
Right.
Dropping off the comps to the front desk. And then at 10:30 p.m., Mandy came into the apartment. She found her mom lying face down on the floor with the hood of her sweatshirt pulled over her head. Mandy calls 911 on both her landline and her cell phone. And while she's on the phone, she calls out for help, and a man in the building comes into the apartment, and she hands the phone in the middle of her 911 call to him, and he gives 911 the information because she's too distraught.
Oh, I'm sure.
And that's the timestamps that the police have between the phone calls and the surveillance footage.
Hey, pretty good. Like we should be narrowing it down now.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Detective Lafredo. She's been reviewing the cameras over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, out of the blue, she stops and she says to the other detective with her, "Holy crap."
Well, and we should mention that Natavia has told them all day that she has just walked
Right. That was
to and from
Right.
the office to Linda's apartment.
So Detective Lafredo notices that as Natavia's entering the lobby, she's carrying cash in her hand.
Yeah.
Why would she have cash in her hand? Why would you just walk? And you can actually see the surveillance footage.
Mm-hmm.
The cash is like sticking upright out of her hand. Like, when you're
And
holding dollar
this
bills
is at
straight.
the 5 p.m. where she's dropping off the comps. Like you can see the cash that she's holding because she's dropping off whatever papers that she's claiming she's dropping off.
It is at 5?
I think so.
Okay. But it's after the noon arrival for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So either way, she's back and she's carrying cash. So Detective Alfredo is like, something's up. So she studies closer and closer. And she realizes that the doorman, right before Natavia walks in, the doorman walks towards the door, opens it, holds it open, and Natavia enters. Now, that happens when doormen see a taxi pull up in front of buildings.
Yeah.
Okay, so if people are just walking in off the sidewalk, the doorman might not always be there to assist them, but they're watching for cabs.
Yeah.
So the doorman lets Natavia in. Natavia's holding cash. As this footage is continuing, the big glass doors to the lobby are starting to shut, and Detective Lafredo sees in the reflection on the glass a taxi cab.
Yeah, which is amazing detective work.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, that she can zoom in and just pay attention to that.
Leave the work to the women. She was going to not give up until she found that tell.
Yeah.
And that was her tell. So now they're going to bring Natavia back in because they are not happy.
Not only that, but they actually got the cab number.
They did. I will tell you about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that a little later, which is even more incredible that they were able to get that in the reflection, especially since, I don't know what you felt, but the surveillance footage looked a little grainy to me.
It did.
But again, we're seeing something maybe that's over filmed, but also it was 2007. And so maybe this has been years later and the film's not as clear.
Yeah.
I don't know. But either way, incredible detective work for sure. So they bring Natavia back down and they're like, look, something isn't right. You got to tell us we're not getting the correct story here. Here's where it's all going to come apart. All right. This sweet, calm, collected, young, mid-20s.
Yeah. Who seemed helpful.
Who was cooperative and helpful is going to turn this case on its head.
Yeah.
So she starts to have kind of a reaction and she's like starting to like break down a little bit. And she tells the detectives a story about blacking out. She says, I blacked out before. I don't even know what happened that day. I blacked out before. I did it once in college and I choked out my roommate and I didn't even know I was doing it. And then the detectives move right on into the story. And for me, I'm like, does anyone have eyes on the roommate? Yeah. If she choked her roommate during a blackout, has anyone called the roommate? Where is the roommate?
Yeah. Also, like, where's the report of this, in
I'm
her
sure
background?
They did.
Yeah.
I'm sure they did investigate it but they didn't mention it. They just breeze right by it, which is just, when you're watching these documentaries, they only have an hour to tell you this long story. But again, as much as we want to respect the storyline and the victims and their families and stuff, I appreciate like a little bit of levity where these detectives are just running us through the story so quick. We're trying to keep up. But
you're like, wait a minute, that's a detail I want to know.
Yes. Yeah. Bring back the fast talking guy. He was funny. So Natavia starts to change her story. And from here on out, every time she talks to the police, it seems like there's a totally different story, right?
Yeah.
So she says that she blacks out, but then she leaves that storyline and says that actually what happened, sorry, I didn't mean that. That's not what happened. I'll just tell you the truth. A mysterious man calls my phone, says her phone, and threatens me and my family if I don't leave the apartment. And he tells Natavia on the phone call that she needs to pack a garbage bag and put in a stapler and other office supplies. Why a stapler was so specific. That's the only office supply she mentioned. But this thief really needs a stapler. And it makes sense to take time to stalk Natavia, her family, and Linda in order to get a stapler for free, for sure.
Sarah, can I just stop you for a second?
Of course you can.
Okay, let's pretend that you've just killed someone.
Mm-hmm.
I would sure hope that you would come up with a better story than a ninja man dressed in black.
Oh, Amy, we haven't even gotten to the ninja. For real.
Demanding a stapler.
A stapler stealer is on the way. The stapler theft goes wrong and he kills Linda.
Like, what is happening here?
She's trying to rationalize a story because now she's been caught. There hasn't been any like solid story or proof here, right?
She could have just said like there was a lot going on that day. I misremember.
No, Amy. What she could have said was lawyer and stop talking.
That's true,
but she didn't.
But I'm just saying, like, if all they had her on was a taxi cab ride, she could have been like, "Oh my goodness, I forgot. I was in a taxi. There was a lot happening that day. I'm sometimes in taxis, sometimes not. Like, my days get mixed together. I mean, sometimes like when you go through a day and you're doing the same thing the next day, like, did you show 6 houses today or 4? Like,
right.
You know what I'm saying?
So what you're hoping is that murderers smarten up a little bit and tell better stories.
I'm just not, but I'm just saying like we've covered some really stupid murderers.
Oh, and it's going to even get better as we go on through this podcast. I see what you're saying. I see exactly what you're saying. And even she had a number of days in between this secondary interview where she could have put herself together a little bit more, I suppose.
I mean, I don't know. It's almost like she called Brian Walsh up and said like, hey,
Brian Walsh.
Give me
Throwback to the Walsh episode.
Yeah,
Go listen to it.
Yeah, give me a bad way to talk to detectives.
You know, Brian Walsh was noted to be in like a training group, kind of like a live your life at a elevated level, become enlightened type of social group. Maybe they were in it together.
I don't know.
Either way, the story is going to get it's going to get out of control. And like I mentioned, she could have at any point stopped and said, I need a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
And we know, according to the United States of America and the jury that found her guilty, she's guilty. And so I'm not saying we're not grateful that she started spinning her story, but she definitely put herself right in the hot seat and she never left because they arrest her after this and it's done.
Yeah.
So back to the story. The stapler stealer is on his way. He supposedly tells Natavia on the phone, again, he called Natavia's phone, and says, you will be the last one to see Linda alive.
So she didn't call police at this point saying she's threatened, her boss is threatened.
Or even just run down to the lobby and
this
get the
$50
doorman,
stapler.
The 20 construction workers that are around, they could maybe blockade the door and stop the stapler theft from happening. Many options. So she changes her story again because the detectives are like, try again, Natavia. Like, let's do this again. And so Natavia adapts. She's like, all right,
I would have loved
out.
to see these interviews.
Well, you can see bits and pieces of them,
I
but
know,
you don't get
but
the
they
good
don't,
stuff.
No, yeah, because I want to see their faces.
Oh my goodness. Especially that one fast talking detective.
Yeah.
He must have been a hoot watching. I mean, not that any of this is funny, but okay. So Natavia's going to change her story again. And into our story walks the ninja. Detectives are like, what now? What did you just say? And she backs it up. There is a ninja who entered. She doesn't say where from, but we know he's on a camera. So I'm going to assume he Spider-Man crawled up the wall to the 18th floor, enters the apartment, brutally kills Linda while Natavia's present. And then, I don't know, salutes Natavia and runs out. That's her story. Amy's just looking confused. For anyone that cannot see what's going on right now, Amy's just staring at me with her mouth open.
It's mind blowing to me. Like, I mean, kindergartners can lie better than this.
That is true. A solid kindergartner can mess with your mind.
Yeah.
I think
they can make you believe.
Oh, kindergartners are the original gaslighters. They can gaslight you into believing you're the gaslighter.
Yeah.
They're good. My guess would be, we're not psychologists, which we make sure that we're clear about, but that she's spiraling, right? She's got to be in panic.
Yeah.
You would assume.
I don't know.
But either way, we know the ninja story is not true either. So at this point, Natavia's out of options. She's exhausted all of the reasonable stories that she can come up with. And so she's going to tell the truth.
Well, or portions.
She's going to tell part of the truth.
Of the truth, yeah.
So she then tells the detectives, all right, I did it. Linda was picking a fight with me. She was berating me, is the verbiage that was used. And I just lost it. And I beat Linda over the head with a yoga stick. So now, all right, we have a confession, and the detectives know. So what they want to do at this point, they're working with the DA, and they want to go back and film her confession again.
Yeah.
And so now we're going to get another version. So she changes her story just slightly this time, but the detectives make note of it. In the final version of Natavia's story, she says that Linda provoked her and lured her into a fight. She doesn't necessarily claim self-defense, but she essentially says that Linda was provoking her, like, go ahead, hit me. Something along those lines, right? So these are all the theories presented by this one human.
Sure. And I will say that knowing what we know about Linda, her personality type, there's been interviews and articles written about, there was a long list of people that went around the block that really weren't her biggest fans because of her abrasiveness in business.
Right.
But I think the berating part may be the most believable. We've both been in positions where, someone in charge doesn't necessarily treat us the best, under circumstances or whatever, especially high dollar stakes and different things like that. But I mean, neither one of us has resorted to murder or something.
I mean,
no,
that you know of. Not an admission. Yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying. Even her friends, Mark and Steven, that are interviewed in this documentary, make it very clear that she was a powerful, and I'm looking for the right word, because I want to show Linda respect for obviously her intelligence, her brain, her street smarts. She has great relationships with her family and her friends love her, but she's got this rock hard side of her that's just immovable, right? Like
Mhm.
she's stubborn. She knows what she wants. She's like the loudest tiny woman you'll ever see in your life. They referenced her as just this small but powerful, loud woman. So
Yeah, I mean, she's
Sure.
only 5'3". She weighs 130 pounds.
right.
She's tiny.
Yeah. So is what you're saying that you understand on some level that if you're in a difficult employer-employee relationship that you can understand being provoked?
No, I just understand like that's the most believable part of her story.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Is that she was berated. Like
Sure.
that like makes sense. Now I'm not saying that justifies her killing in
Of
any
course not.
way, but she only worked for her for a few short months. We know that Linda fired her last executive assistant. She was known to be very difficult to work for. I think a lot of it, whether it was the tumor placement that was making her kind of go up and down with
Moods.
Yeah.
Moods. Yeah.
Or medication that she was on to try to manage that, or just her regular personality. Like maybe it's a mixture of all of it. I'm just saying that is the most believable part.
Sure. Yeah. So like logically, we can understand the provoking
But
of
most people,
of an aggressive act.
most people in that situation say, you know what? I quit, or I'm going to leave to the office now. Like Natavia obviously had other options other than.
Yeah, she took it a little far.
Yeah, a
Yep.
lot far.
Yeah.
But, that's all I'm saying is that's the most believable part of her confession.
Yeah, absolutely. And it brings the detectives to their next point, which is what's the motive? Like, okay, so you're in this interaction, this altercation. Linda's known to be, like you said, difficult to work for or very demanding. Okay, but most people don't snap on a dime, especially in their young 20s.
Yeah.
It's just
over
unusual.
just a boss screaming at them.
But now we're going to find a little bit of motive.
Okay.
All right. So Mark, her good friend Mark, right? He tells the detectives that the day before
So
Linda's
October
murder,
29th.
October 29th, he was visiting Linda, like they were at her apartment.
Mm.
And Linda asked Mark, what would you do if you found out someone was stealing from you?
Oh.
And Mark says, I told her, like, I would confront the person. And that's it. They leave the conversation at that. There's no more discussion. So he doesn't have any follow-up information to that. But now we've potentially got some motive. So as a part of the investigation, detectives have pulled or requested phone records because Natavia, Mark, Samantha, like everybody, not everybody, several people have mentioned that they've made phone calls during the day.
Yeah.
So they need to lock down timelines now.
Well, and Mandy did say that she had tried to call. She didn't say what time, but it was during the day that she had tried to call her mom to tell her she was going to be out with friends late.
Sure.
Because she was in from out of town.
Yeah.
And Natavia had answered, and she had left a message with Natavia and didn't talk to her mom.
Okay. So the detectives noticed in the phone records that there's either several repeat or multiple phone calls to same credit card companies. And so they're able to actually get recordings of those phone calls, at least one of them. And it is actually Natavia calling in and pretending to be Linda.
Oh, no way.
And so she was perpetrating credit card theft. It doesn't go into more detail about like what the result of that was, but she is charged with grand larceny.
Yeah.
So there was a dollar amount attached to this.
She opened a couple, I think. They say couple, but they specifically reference Amex,
Right.
probably because Amex is the one that like recorded the conversation or maybe sent
Sure.
Linda the statement.
Well, and I'm just going to pitch you something like a softball here. I didn't prepare for this. It's just crossing my mind as we're discussing this, but they do mention it's specifically American Express, right? And they're known infamously for the black card, right?
Yeah, no
And
limit.
Yeah, and I don't know that Linda had one. I'm not saying that, but we do know that she ran in celebrity circles. She was married to Seymour Stein, who was the president of Warner Brothers. It's not far-fetched to think that she was
Had pretty
potentially
good
a holder of a
credit.
black card
Yeah.
or really high credit limits at least.
Yeah.
And so perhaps Natavia took advantage of this because she's thinking someone with this amount of credit isn't going to notice a $5,000 charge here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Speculation, but it makes sense.
Yeah, but I think you and I both know that the wealthier the client, like the more that they track every dollar spent.
That depends. Like wealthy clients, sure. Wealthy employers?
Yeah.
People that are bringing in a lot of money aren't always managing their books, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it brings to attention. I mean, they usually do track their money pretty good, though.
Unless they have like a director
Yeah,
or an accountant that's in charge of managing their books. And so
yeah.
they're hands off.
I guess there are a lot of stories out there where, they don't find like the embezzlement has taken place up until like millions of dollars later. So,
Sure.
yeah.
So they also are able to track that there's some ATM pulls using these credit cards. And so they do actually find surveillance camera of Natavia at ATMs using Linda's credit cards. So theft going on here.
Could easily be explained from Natavia's point of view that Linda had asked her, because Linda doesn't really go outside that much except for her walk.
Well, remember, yes, I see exactly what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? Like it would be very easy I'm her executive assistant. I'm getting her dressed in the morning. I run her errands. I go to the bank. She asks me for cash.
Sure. If it was an isolated incident, but they also have those phone calls where Natavia's mimicking Linda. And again, I don't know the details, but it does make sense. Like if she was calling in and asking something, she's not asking to like raise a credit limit, right? She's probably asking for a digital card or to add a user to a card. And so I think they're able to track the actual number of, right? And so that's how they find footage. Either way, they do charge Natavia with grand larceny to the tune of $30,000. And so we know that there was proof. Now, you and I might have mentioned in part one, I don't know if we did, but if not, we'd at least talked about this off mic. This is an unusual case for us in the sense that we don't have any court documentation. We don't have anything more than a few articles and this one documentary to go by.
Well, yeah, we have court docs from the appeal, but not
from the appeal, not the trial. So
we don't have the transcripts of the trial.
So kind of like you mentioned earlier, detectives were able to actually pull the number off of the taxi cab in the reflection of the glass door, which is just incredible that they could. And they tracked the destination of the cab because cabs in New York and in most large cities, I would assume, but definitely New York, right? They keep track because cabbies are employees. And so they're tracking every single place they're going. And that's also how they calculate what they're owed. And so they tracked the destination of the cab at this kind of time in the day. And the cab picked somebody up, took them to a nearby clothing store. The detectives go and they interview the staff and the clerk at the clothing store. And Natavia was seen there again and was attempting to buy matching cargo pants to the pants that she was wearing seen in the footage.
Oh, interesting.
So she's looking for a different change of clothes. And you had said earlier on in your timestamps that you shared with us, Natavia left in the middle of the day carrying 2 large bags.
Yeah.
Of what?
Yeah, I mean, people have speculated that one of the bags seemed a little heavy laden was the word that was used, and that they felt like maybe because the coroner reported that Linda would have had to been killed with a metal object. And so they speculated that the murder weapon was in one of those bags. The murder weapon has never been found.
So you think the yoga stick is just total crap?
Okay, I do yoga. I have never, ever heard of a yoga stick.
They do say that in the material, but I did find something.
And Natavia uses the word wooden yoga stick. And there are these like sticks that like will help. I mean, some people have referred to like help with your posture and you put it behind, but it doesn't like collapse. Like it's one solid, almost like a cane size. And there's nothing, Natavia specifically mentions wooden, and the coroner specifically says it had to have been a metal object.
So I did look, because that's like immediately shut down in the material. Like there's no such thing as a yoga stick. So I did try to look that up and found that there is, like you just said, it's a stick. It looks like a broomstick, and honestly probably has the weight of a broomstick because what it's for, like you said, posturing, you put it behind your back and then you loop your arms through it to stretch your back and straighten your spine. But let's think about it. Natavia is young. She's petite enough, right? And so is Linda. Like it would take a pretty solid amount of strength to strike somebody over the head that many times and to beat them to death. Like, it can't be as easy as it sounds because most of us Americans are free. Like there had to be a significant amount of force. And to your point, like a heavier, more solid object. That wouldn't make any sense that a wooden like broomstick, or you said cane size, could beat somebody to death.
Well, I think because sometimes when, someone uses a wooden object, like the pieces of wood splinter off and it's less in the wood. And because of that, I mean, obviously the coroner sees a lot of wounds. And so they were able to determine, they use the word laceration too. So a metal object with
like a sharp edge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, like this is just a case that we don't have a lot of those details on. We don't have court transcripts, documents. The detectives tell the story, but they're not giving those fine details. And you and I, but let's just briefly mention, like, we both think that the lack of public information out there is intentional.
I do.
Right? Which is okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The family would want privacy for Linda. That's absolutely fair.
I think that the family, especially her ex-husband, they had enough money out there to kind of keep the narrative about Linda positive and not negative. And I think they've been able to suppress a lot of the outlying story, which, is to each their own. Sometimes I struggle on whether or not, like, we go down and try to figure out transcripts and stuff like that for the trial. From what I was able to gather, Natavia's attorney didn't call any witnesses. They just kind of cross-examined.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of their cross-examination was objected. They were trying to spin different theories during their cross-examination, but didn't actually
accomplish
any witnesses. And didn't obviously accomplish anything. But there are some discrepancies that, you and I are both not lawyers, that I have a problem with, that I would have raised as her defense. But just because we live in a day and age where DNA evidence, the force, you talked about the force it would take and the strength to take to bash someone over the head, but you have blood spatter that would be all over the place. And Natavia is seen on surveillance footage wearing the same clothes. Now, people have kind of speculated that her pants were turned inside out.
Well, they did see them. Okay, so I'm going to stop you real quick, because here's how they know. So the detectives, as they track down where the cab went to a clothing store, came back, right? So they notice, and again, Detective Alfredo has her eyeballs on that day because she notices all these details. When Natavia comes back into the building, what I assume is for the last time, Natavia's cargo pants are turned inside out. So what I'm saying is, why I stopped you, is because cargo pants are known specifically for their really heavy pockets all down the side of the pant, right?
Yeah.
So she comes back in the same outfit, wearing the same pant, but they're inside out and there is no pocket.
They're light cream color. This is my problem. They're light cream color. They're inside out. If it's blood, you've bashed someone in the head over 20 times, 10 to 20, we'll say.
Yeah.
Between
we'll
our
round it up
numbers.
from 1.
No, but I'm just saying, like, your research showed 10, mine showed 20. Regardless, like, that's a lot. There's going to be, police confiscated her clothes. Like, there was never any mention of finding DNA.
Well, and this is a part of the story that we just will never, maybe not never, but we just don't know, because we don't have as fine detail as we do get sometimes in other public cases. And again, I absolutely respect we're speculating that the family is intentionally kept, the story as suppressed as possible. I absolutely respect that. I really do.
Too.
Peace for your mother and for a beloved friend and woman. I absolutely get that. I'm just saying maybe there is an easy explanation to that you and I just don't know. We'll never know because, we just don't have access to that information. Before we discussed timestamps, briefly speculated, like, if you commit a murder in the apartment, like the living space of your boss or whomever you're with, you have access to a washing machine or potentially a change of clothes if you're there every day in and out. Maybe she put on a pair of Linda's pants. I just solved it. There we go. All right, cue the music. We're done. End the episode. Possibility, though, right? That maybe she changed her clothes, because you're right. She's seen on surveillance camera and there isn't blood stains and spatter, and there would have to be. You're absolutely right. Unless I guess maybe the object was heavy enough and long enough that she hit her enough from a distance. Maybe she was bending over her, so the splatter didn't get back on her clothing. I don't know. But she is in somebody's personal space. Maybe she did have access to a change of clothes.
Yeah, I don't know. That's one of the discrepancies that I don't love. I know that
I don't love.
Like, all murders, like, we don't have it like wrapped up in this little bow and nicely knitted, but still.
Well, and perhaps they kind of didn't spend time chasing those fine details because they had a confession. They didn't have just one confession, they had 2.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So maybe the investigation didn't go any further than that.
Yeah, maybe they just...
So here we're at. We've reached the arrest of Natavia. She's told these wild stories in and out. The detectives are frustrated with her, but relieved that they've gotten to this point. Natavia's arrested and held from there on out, and then goes to trial. Okay. And like we've said, we don't have a ton of detail on that. Amy, will you tell me a little bit about the sentencing and her charges and stuff? Why don't we cover that?
So she was found guilty, And then what we do have is her appeal. So she had appealed her sentence, and there was a ruling that came down from the Supreme Court of New York County, and the judges, Richard D. Firthers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was rendered May 3rd, 2010. And so it says the convicting defendant, which would be Natavia, after a jury trial of murder in the second degree.
I was going to ask you that. Was it jury or bench? Okay.
Jury trial. She's found guilty in murder in the second degree, 3 counts of grand larceny in the third degree, 2 counts of identity theft in the first degree, 6 counts of petit larceny, 3 counts of forgery in the second degree, and 6 counts of grand larceny in the fourth degree, and sentencing her to an aggregate term of 27 years to life with restitution in the amount of $31,500, unanimously affirmed, which means that they upheld her conviction.
Unanimously.
Yes.
Yeah. So, oh my goodness. Okay. Actually, just quick note. It would be really interesting if at some point, maybe not in this episode, because we should like write notes and back our stuff up for sure. But it'd be great to go over like what first degree murder, second degree murder, manslaughter is, right?
We could have a guest speaker come on and
let's do it.
Really talk about like the different things. And obviously,
Amy, let's just go to law school.
I know we really need to. Obviously, in New York, it's different than in other states, like what the degrees are. And so,
do you have any more information on, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but like what specifically second degree murder? Because, so not premeditated.
Yeah. So
right?
First degree is the premeditation. Second degree is just,
oops, I did it.
Yeah. Well, and it's different than manslaughter. Like manslaughter is really an oops. It was an accident kind of
that's
thing.
Fair.
So second degree, obviously like intended murder, like committed the crime with intent to kill someone.
Sure.
The difference between like grand larceny and petit larceny, it kind of differs between a dollar amount of $500 to $1,000 is considered like petit larceny. And those are usually just like a $2,000 fine and like a year in jail. It's like a class A misdemeanor. But I think with all of her charges together, like it just showed the extent, all the larceny charges, the identity theft charges, like all of that just showed, backed the motive up that the police were able to find with the credit cards and ATM withdrawals and just stuff like that.
Okay, I have one more question for you.
Sure.
Not trying to put you on the spot. I guess either I assumed or I have wrong or it's just different. I've heard petty larceny.
Yeah.
And you're saying
petit.
What is that?
Petit is
like you pet your hamster. What is it?
Yeah, petit is like the official term for petty larceny.
It's like the Latin term.
It's the
like
legal term.
The root word of petty is petit.
Yeah, it's the legal term.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, either way, Natavia's away for a long time, and it sounds like her appeal was shut down unanimously and very quickly.
Yeah. I think the saddest part of this whole thing, other than Linda dying, because that's a really sad part, is that why Natavia is in jail, she finds out she's pregnant.
I completely forgot about that. Hey, everybody, it's the Surprise Sarah segment where Amy tells Sarah something she forgot. I completely forgot about that. All right, well, let's tack on a few more minutes to this episode because let's go into that for a second. It actually ties in, and I don't know if you know what I know.
I guess I don't
neither
think
of us
do.
Let's try it. So you're right. She's in jail, and she finds out. So she hasn't been sentenced yet. So she's in jail still. She hasn't been given a prison sentence.
No, she's waiting a trial because she found out early on that she was like 5 or 6 weeks pregnant.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So I do remember in this material that it was either speculated or proven, but in the context that I was watching it, it didn't specify that Natavia's boyfriend, who was in like West Virginia, he was in a different state, but close by, that she was sending money to him. And so the theory is that she was stealing from a wealthy woman to send to him to stash away for their baby. Because we do know a little bit about Natavia's family and her upbringing, and she was certainly not brought up on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. She had a very different upbringing. I'm not saying the complete opposite. I'm saying it was different worlds. She wasn't born privileged or didn't come into privilege in her life. And so it was theorized that she was stealing from someone who was wealthy to stash money away for their impending child.
And maybe I have no idea. I had thought that she only found out she didn't know she was pregnant until she was already in jail, but 'cause at 5 or 6 weeks, you don't really know you're pregnant.
Well, maybe they were
by the-
trying to get pregnant, so
Maybe.
they were just pre-planning.
Pre-planning. That
Taking
could
those
be.
prenatals,
Yeah.
stealing cash from people to just stack up. Makes sense.
I mean, what a way to bring a kid in the world.
And that's exactly what happens, right? So she does give birth in prison. And the baby is, as always, this is just what happens. Of course, the baby is taken away and either adopted, put into the system. This baby goes with family.
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
when this happens in prison, in women's prisons, that is unfortunately what happens. The baby is separated from the mother immediately.
Yeah.
And I hope that the baby is with family, if that gives any solace to,
Yeah.
the loss of Natavia. I mean,
by
the
baby
loss,
is.
she's spending the rest of her life in prison, and deserved. I'm not saying that isn't deserved. Linda lost her life unfairly.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying if her family has some kind of comfort in knowing that they're raising her child.
Yeah.
So what a case.
What a case.
This one was very interesting to me up at the top at the beginning because the headlines and the way that it's advertised is the celebrity realtor, right?
Yeah.
Which was
larger
fascinating.
than life personality.
Larger than life
Yeah.
personality. It was New York slammed on its brakes and stopped to take a breath when they found out Linda Stein had died. And so, yeah, this one was interesting. In this particular case, it is the realtor that was the victim.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Amy, at the end of every case, you and I both do a takeaway.
Yeah.
And the takeaway can either be real estate related, crime related, or both.
Yeah.
So you want to start?
Sure. I actually, because this case was the way it was, I don't understand the way people react, the way that they react. And so I did kind of a dive into like bosses that are bullies or, different things like that.
Intimidating employers.
Yeah. And I came across an article written by a psychologist that talked about how with strong personality types and bullying in the workplace, they usually they'll scream or they'll scheme. And I think that we've both been part of work environments where we have either been
one or the other or both,
right?
Have been a part of
like the toxic culture that kind of goes on in different parts of our lives, and how we've responded, and we've always tried to maintain that professionalism and
professionalism
is, I don't know. I'm not
I get exactly what you're saying.
Taking my thoughts very clearly, but
try to take the high road.
Yeah, we do. And we just
absolutely,
don't disparage or, we'll cross it off as, they're having a bad day, which doesn't make right or wrong or, whatever their actions, but how people just react differently and so unnecessarily. I don't think that Natavia's motive really should have ended in Linda Stein being killed.
Yeah.
That was just my kind of...
No, that's great. And I'm glad you looked that up a little bit, because it is fascinating how, again, a young woman snaps, literally it wasn't
she has
premeditated.
Her whole life ahead of her. Just quit the job.
And then
even...
She spends the next 3 days to 3 months trying to figure out her story and still can't come up with the answer.
Yeah.
So she's obviously not, I think obviously not, but crafty and well planned, and you know what I mean? She's spinning stories about ninjas and stapler stealers, and it just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I appreciate that you looked into that a little bit out of almost curiosity, right?
Yeah.
How does someone just go from 0 to 60, regardless of being provoked, pestered, put in, you use the word toxic workplaces necessarily. It is very interesting, the psychology of that. How did we get this far this fast? Because Natavia is going to spend the rest of her life in prison, and that in a way is a death sentence. Now, hear me out, not victim blaming or shaming any victim of murder, homicide. I'm just saying getting a life sentence is in a way a death sentence, right? You don't have life on the inside ever again. So that's a very interesting takeaway. Thanks.
To some families, they don't feel like that, because they're still living and their family member is not. So I think it depends on which side you're at.
Yeah, that was an excellent takeaway. Thank you. And we thought it was really clever at the beginning of this podcast series as we were planning this to do takeaways. I'll take the hit. I think it might have been my idea. I really apologize because looking at our list of, I think I'm up to 180 subjects on our list so far. We're going to have to take some interesting looks at takeaways.
We might have to
But here's mine. Mine's like totally opposite, which we seem to do that a lot.
Yeah.
So mine's not necessarily real estate or crime related, but it is like being dedicated to your job related. Okay, we'll say that. So Detective Alfredo Lafredo, right, who I respect. Like, I loved seeing her on screen giving that interview. I think she was fascinating. But my takeaway was she did not give up on that video, that surveillance footage. And they do specifically reference in this episode that she watched it for hours and hours on end, which, like I said earlier, has to be very dry and mundane. And if you're not hyper-focused in on that, anyone could have easily missed that detail. Seriously, you guys, this case got cracked open because she caught the reflection. Yeah, she saw the dollar bills, but then caught the reflection of a taxi cab on the glass door.
Yeah.
That's incredible detective work, because Natavia did end up confessing, but only when she was pressured to. So what if that confession had never happened? You know? And so my takeaway is, don't give up. When you believe in something, she said, I knew that this video had to tell. When you believe in something, you've got a gut feeling, don't give up. Stick through it, because whatever the situation is, whatever the story is, you're going to crack it. You will crack it if you just stay committed to your gut feeling and you follow through.
I love that takeaway.
Thank you.
Because so often we do give up. We're just like, oh, throw the phone across the room. Like,
Amy is specifically calling me out right now, which is fair. All I'm going to say is, when you go to Disney World with 4 coworkers and you only got there on a plane at midnight because there were hurricanes all over Florida, but you're going anyway, because why would we pass up Disney World in the middle of a hurricane?
We were there
so
for
then
a
we
conference.
get there, and day 5, they've woken me up at 5 a.m. every day to get in line for Disney World. And I think it was night 4. Amy looks at me and says, all right, we got to get up at like 6. And I just threw my phone. Not in like a rage throw, right? But I was like, I give up. And I just threw it. I was exhausted. That was an excellent call out. That was smooth. We'll tell that story someday. Like, well, maybe, you know what? Let's talk about that really quick, and then we'll wrap this show up. But we are really liking the idea of having guests on.
Yeah.
Right. And we had a fantastic guest a couple episodes ago, Justin Stratton with Meridian Title, who came in and educated us even on, and not to mention our audience, on some really fascinating things. I love that episode. That one was one of my favorites. The mysterious disappearance and death of Chuck Morgan. Anyway, we love the idea of having guests on, guests that are not only agents, but anyone in our professional field, right? I mean, we're going to even go as far as like both of our spouses interact in our fields in certain ways. So that's really exciting. But I'm just saying, maybe we'll have the Disney crew on one day.
Yeah.
And
my goodness.
We'll tell the real life true crime story of Sarah's trip to Disney World.
To a conference that ended up being
really a Disney World trip.
Yeah, it really was.
It was incredible. Incredible memories. I did throw my phone, but not out of rage and not at anybody. Let's just be clear. All right. And one more thing I just want to tie in really quick. I mean, we're only a slight ways into this podcast series, right? Like, we're on case 7, 5, something like that. And so right now we're working on our material. We're racking it up. We're going to edit it, make it beautiful before we publish it. But we did put a call out there a couple episodes ago. So I just want to bring it up again. As we start publishing it, we would love to get questions or letters. I guess nobody writes letters anymore, maybe. So don't handwrite us a letter, because we don't know where it would go. But in email, we're going to make sure our social medias are set up so that we're easy to connect with.
Yeah.
Send a couple real estate questions or crime questions. I mean, we're not detectives, psychologists, lawyers, or investigative journalists, but we'll certainly, try and answer questions from the perspectives that we have on the case.
Yeah.
And we think that would be a super interesting element to add. So let's just, Amy, remind me to remind our audience to do that, will you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Help us to know what you want to listen to.
Yeah. So let's wrap this case up.
All right.
All right, everybody. Have a wonderful day. And Amy, I'll see you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.